welcome to episode 11 of Project Mouse. At last, after more than 2 years, I finally get to put some paint on the mouse. Part of me is really looking forward to this stage, but another part is really nervous. I've been watching lots of videos on YouTube, trying to find the best way of tackling the mouse camouflage. James at LPJ Models has some excellent tutorials, showing the many techniques he uses to create incredible models. His channel is well worth a look. There's a link in the description. I spent several hours trying to work out the camouflage pattern of the mouse from black and white reference photos, and this is what I came up with. These plans should help me get the right colours in the right places. My elevations are accurate to the photos, but the plan view is interpreted. My next choice was what paint to choose. Tamiya and Vallejo are both excellent brands, but in the end I decided to go with Vallejo. The Vallejo colours seemed to be the most accurate, based on colour swatches I'd compared at the Bovington Tank Museum. Now I had to break down the mouse ready for paint. At this stage it still comes apart for painting pretty easily. The tracks are a bit unwieldy, but come off fine as long as I can find the track pin that isn't glued in. This is why I designed the mouse bogies to be held in with screws and the idler and drive sprocket to be bolted into place. I would never have been able to paint them had they been permanently fixed to the lower hull. Now everything's in bits, let's fire up the airbrush. I begin by spraying the lower hull with Vallejo acrylic polyurethane German dark yellow surface primer, which is a pretty good Dunkelgelb. I'm using a Harder & Steenbeck Infinity airbrush with a 0.2 nozzle. The paint needs thinning, but sprays very well. There are so many nooks and crannies on the lower hull, I have to be careful to get everything covered. Now it's onto the main hull. This was probably the easiest part of all to paint. It's just a big box at the end of the day, with a few sticky out bits. The turret was also straightforward to spray, but I always knew getting the base colour on was going to be the easiest stage of the whole process. My next stage was to try and add some shadows to the mouse, to give some depth to the surface. Initially I added red-brown to the Dunkelgelb to create the shadows, but this was way too red, so I added a few drops of black instead. I also tried to create some highlighted areas by adding white to the Dunkelgelb. This shading stage eventually came out fairly well, but I think it may be too subtle. This was mainly down to my lack of confidence. To mark out the camouflage pattern, I used the latest incarnation of Johnson's Clear, now called Revive It. This was just brushed on by hand, following the camo pattern I'd previously worked out. This gave me a good guide to work from for the next stage. I decided to go with Vallejo Model Air Red Brown and Olive Green for the camo, as I had sprayed Model Air before and had enough to worry about without adding thinning paint to the list. The Harder & Steenbeck was great for this job. I started with the red-brown, outlining the areas and then filling them in. It took a very long time and a lot of concentration, as it's quite a complex pattern to follow. So, here's all the red-brown sprayed. And here's the mouse with all the camo sprayed. It certainly is striking. The pattern does an excellent job of breaking up the shape of the mouse, but I felt the overall appearance was somehow not quite right. I tried to tone down the saturation of the camo with filters and washes, which I felt did little except make all of the colours lose definition. It became hard to distinguish the red-brown from the olive green. So I decided to experiment with my new best friend, oils. These allowed me to lighten, darken and bring back the saturation of the camo selectively, giving a much more natural look to the mouse. I decided to turn my attention to the lower hull and running gear, while I worked out my next stage in tackling the camo. The road wheels and idlers were given a coat of Vallejo steel. Oil washes were then added to bring out the detail and add grime. Having cast my own tracks, I wanted to chemically blacken them rather than paint them. I decided to invest in 2 VMS track blacking kits. Having watched the videos online, it seemed like a good idea. My tracks are cast in pewter, which is a mixture of tin and lead, which I figured would oxidise well to black. The tracks have to be thoroughly cleaned first. For this I used VMS styrene solvent, as recommended. For the first stage, you soak the tracks in the activating bath for 10 minutes, carefully removing any air bubbles, then turning them over for another 10 minutes. I followed the instructions to the letter, as I had no idea how I was going to recover my tracks if something went wrong. A word of warning, this stuff trashed my shirt and jeans, so be careful with it. At least my skin's okay. After rinsing off the tracks, the blackening solution is mixed up as per the instructions, and poured over the tracks. You can see the reaction taking place before your very eyes. And here's the result I got. Instead of black, I got a greyish brown. This is not what I hoped for. The mouse tracks were supposed to be black, so I broke out the oils again and gave them a random mix of burnt umber and French ultramarine. This I then rounded off by dry brushing some Vallejo steel to the inner surface and gave them a light treatment with some Vallejo weathering pigments. So, how do I know I got the colours right? Well, here's a Panzer IV track link from the Nashorn restoration guys. And here's my completed weathered track. I think it's come out pretty well. I then added more pigments and washes to the lower hull and running gear before finally assembling the mouse. And here it is. I've added some subtle weathering to the superstructure and given everything a coat of matte varnish, but it's still not how I want it. Am I happy with the result? No is the short answer. As a first attempt, I learned a lot, but it needs toning down. I decided to tackle the camo with some washes and dry brushing of Tamiya XF57 Buff. The buffed worked great, taking down the saturation of all the camo colours and lightening the overall look of the mouse. I then gave the mouse a mist coat of buff, which further unified the tones. I had to go over the oil pin washes again to sharpen up some of the detail. I reckon I'm now about 70% there with the camo and weathering, but at least I'm going in the right direction now. The subtle variation in the weight of the spraying on the original mouse is a bit beyond my abilities at present. Maybe I'll tackle that with the oils when I get a bit more confident, and save that for the next episode. Right now, I need to lie down. It's all been a bit intense. In the final episode of Project Mouse, I'll construct a base to display this monster, together with its creator, Ferdinand Porsche. I hope you find Project Mouse interesting and enjoy seeing the progress. If you do, hit the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel to see more from Staples and Vine. If you have any questions about Project Mouse, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.